Hey everyone, and welcome to Project Corinthians 9. This new video is covering Mohammad Hijab's statements on Christianity and Islam. One thing you must understand about Islam is that it is not a religion of peace. Yes, Islam can mean peace, not necessarily. There's a bit more to that than what meets the eye, but just because something claims peace and says peace does not mean it is peaceful. Now, most Muslims today are peaceful. We must understand that. However, their ideology is a twisted ideology. It is one that's cherry-picked, and it does not align to Muhammad's ideology. Now, for those of us who actually study Muhammad's ideology and have actually gone against several different people who claim to be scholars and have written arguments against them, which they do ignore, and they refuse to fight against. We are learning the religion, and those who defend this religion are in fact more than likely lying to themselves. And I say more than likely because some people are willingly ignorant, and others they are totally misled, and they honestly believe this stuff and go with it. Now, Christianity, on the other hand, has had violent parts. That is not due to the original Christians, but to a outside view that other Christians have formulated, and they have twisted the original view and they have created their own views. That is the reason we have denominations and various other things, same as Islam. It has its own views, it has its own denominations, things like that. So, one thing that Mohammad Hijab stated was that Christianity was done by the sword while Islam was done by being organic, which means that Christianity fought people and forced them to convert, while Islam never did that. And in fact, all it ever did was just preach Islam to people, and they automatically converted. That is false. Catholicism, yes, it did use the sword as a government, and while it did attack other Christians, while it did attack other nations and other countries, it did attack Christians. And these were the Christians that were against Catholicism, that did not believe the doctrine or did not accept all parts that the Roman Catholic government had stated. So, if Christianity is solely based on Catholicism, then sure, Christianity was spread partly by the sword. However, Catholicism is not all about the sword, and in fact, many of it has been very peaceful. In fact, most people in Catholicism have been peaceful throughout ever since it began. So one cannot say that Christianity is inherently violent. You have to say that it is inherently loving and peaceful. Now, Islam has parts that are peaceful because it is based on dualism, which means that it's peaceful towards other followers of Islam, but it is also violent towards non-followers. Now remember that this video is not an attack against Islam. However, it is an attack against the person who believes in it and is trying to attack Christianity by saying that we are all murderers and that all we want to do is kill people. In fact, Christianity did start off with people being persecuted and fleeing to other countries where they did not persecute others, but instead they used the freedom that they were given, and they used the opportunity to reach people by mainly preaching and teaching the gospel. And our gospel is not violent, it is peaceful. So for one to say that we spread Christianity solely by the sword, he is wrong. Now, Islam was not spread solely by missionaries and preachers and teachers. Instead, if you look at it, and you can name different countries because it started in Saudi Arabia, so any country that Islam has touched that's outside of Saudi Arabia was, in fact, conquered by a sword. Some will say that Africa was not conquered by a sword, but this is actually false. Instead, they used the sword a bit to get into Africa, and then from there they got to the government, so that the government would be able to would bring up teachers and preachers who would eventually convert the rest of the people, especially because many of them were being sold into slavery and enslaved and forced to do large work. So eventually the people would just hear the message and automatically accept, because it would be less of a burden to them. So either be a slave, be treated as a practically third-rate citizen, or convert, and suddenly you are now going to be treated as a brother or sister in the religion, which would make it a lot easier. You wouldn't have to pay so much, things like that. So it is more or less a psychological tactic to get people to convert to your religion by forcing them to submit and forcing them to give so much of their profits to you until they can no longer handle it, so they eventually convert. That is Islam. Is it true that Christians have been hypocrites? Yes. But it is also true that a majority of the Muslims today who adhere to the religion are huge hypocrites. While they may not like that, it is in fact true. And of course, Christians, they are huge hypocrites as well. Many of them talk about love and peace and yet have none in their hearts, which means that they are, of course, of the Antichrist and not Christians. However, Muslims who claim to adhere to a religion of peace are in fact lying to themselves and are following their own doctrine and not the one of Muhammad. Now, Mohammad Hijab, a person who believes he is a apologist in the UK, has failed tremendously at being able to actually be loving and peaceful to the people that he claims he loves and is peaceful to. If you notice that the time whenever he was with David Wood went to go shake his hand, and instead he refused to shake David Wood's hand. That is showing that he was claiming to be superior over David Wood. And that shows that he is not loving, he is not peaceful, for if he was, he would have been respectful and shook David Wood's hand. Now, I will go ahead and show the portion of, or I would just link the video to the debate, and you can watch it for yourself. But again, Mohammad Hijab, if he is the example of Muslims, he is a terrible example, and he is starting to follow the way of Muhammad. He's not quite there, but he is starting to go around to that. Now, understand that we are not here to make Muslims seem awful. We're not here to do that. But it must be said, though, that Islam is a religion that is not inherently peaceful or loving. Christianity is. Christianity is built on the love of Christ for all men, that he would sacrifice himself as a lamb, he would become as a servant, sacrifice himself as a lamb so that we could be saved from our sins. Islam, on the other hand, teaches that all men are to submit. And by submission, it is not to God alone, but it is to Muhammad. So it is really submission to God and his prophet, Muhammad. That is what Islam teaches, is to submit to the doctrine of Muhammad, which claims to be the doctrine of God, and to God himself. Now, Christians, on the other hand, we submit to God alone. And if that's not true Islam, I don't know what is.